Before we begin, a quick note. This is a special edition of Dark Perimeter. What you are about to hear is a breaking news story, one that broke on March 31st, 2026, and was still developing when we recorded this episode. Some details may have changed. We will tell you what is confirmed, what is disputed, and what remains unknown. That is always our standard. On a story this fresh, it matters even more. Now, the story. It is just after 4 a.m. Eastern Time. A security researcher named Chaofan Shou, an intern at a blockchain startup, is awake. He is poking around the NPM registry, the public package repository, that millions of developers use to download software. He downloads the latest release of Anthropic's Claude Code, version 2.1.88. He opens the package. Something catches his eye. A 59.8 megabyte file, a source map. The kind of file that is never supposed to ship in a public software release. The kind of file that maps obfuscated, bundled code back to the original human-readable source. He follows the reference inside it. It points to a zip archive sitting on Anthropic's own cloud storage. Publicly accessible. He downloads it, he decompresses it, and inside, he finds 512,000 lines of unobfuscated TypeScript code, the complete internal source, code of Claude Code, one of the most commercially successful AI products in the world, generating an estimated $2.5 billion in annualized revenue. He posts to X at 4:23 in the morning. Claude Code source code has been leaked via a map file in their NPM registry. By the time most of the world woke up, the code was everywhere. Intro. Welcome to Dark Perimeter. I'm Cole Drayden. In the year we have been doing this show, we have covered some of the most consequential cybersecurity incidents in history, nation-states destroying corporate infrastructure, teenagers bypassing billion-dollar security systems with a phone call, AI agents being weaponized through their own tooling. Today's story is different, because today, the company at the center of the incident is not a victim of a sophisticated attacker. It is the victim of a missing line in a configuration file. And the consequences, legal, competitive, and reputational, are still unfolding. Act 1. What is Claude Code and why does it matter? To understand why this leak matters, you need to understand what was leaked and what it is worth. Claude Code is Anthropic's flagship AI coding assistant. It runs in your terminal, you give it instructions in plain English, and it reads your files, writes code, fixes bugs, runs tests, and manages entire software projects autonomously. It is not a chatbot. It is an agent, a piece of software that takes actions in the real world on your behalf. It has been extraordinarily successful. By early 2026, Claude Code alone was generating an estimated $2.5 billion in annualized recurring revenue. That figure had more than doubled since the start of the year. Enterprise adoption, Fortune 500 companies, large law firms, financial institutions accounted for the majority of that revenue. Anthropic as a whole was valued at approximately $380 billion and widely expected to pursue an IPO. Claude Code is closed source. Anthropic deliberately chose not to open source it, keeping the internal architecture proprietary. This is not unusual in the AI industry. The products. Commercial value depends in part on the engineering decisions embedded in its code. Competitors. Like OpenAI, Google, and smaller companies like Cursor have poured resources into building competing tools, knowing that whoever builds the best AI coding agent wins a substantial share of the enterprise software market. The source code that leaked on March 31st was not the underlying AI model. The model weights, the actual intelligence of Claude, were not exposed. What was exposed was the agentic harness, the software that sits around the model and tells it how to behave, what tools to use, how to manage memory, how to handle permissions, and how to orchestrate complex multi-step tasks. That harness, it turns out, contains a great deal of information that Anthropic would have much preferred to keep private. Act 2. How it happened. The cause of this leak was not a sophisticated attacker. There was no spear phishing campaign, no zero-day exploit, no nation-state, no disgruntled employee with a USB drive. It was a missing configuration entry, a single line that was never added to a file called .npm ignore. Here is what happened technically, and it is worth understanding because it is embarrassingly preventable. Claude Code is built on Bun, a JavaScript runtime that Anthropic acquired in late 2025. Bun, by default, generates source maps when it compiles code. Source maps are debugging tools. They allow engineers to trace errors in compiled, minified code back to the original source. They are standard practice in software development and extremely useful internally. They are never supposed to ship in a public package release. The way you prevent that is simple. You add an entry to a file called .npm ignore, essentially. A list that tells the npm packaging tool what to exclude from a public release. If you include *.map in that file, source maps never make it into the published package. Nobody added that line. So when Anthropic's release pipeline bundled Claude Code version 2.1.88 and pushed it to the public npm registry, the source map file went along for the ride. 60 megabytes of it. And inside that source map was a reference, a pointer, to a zip archive sitting on Anthropic's own Cloudflare R2 storage bucket, a storage bucket that was publicly accessible. Cheofan Show followed that pointer, downloaded the archive, and found the full unobfuscated source. The architecture, the prompts, the permission models, the feature flags, the internal model code names, the unreleased capabilities, all of it. Anthropic confirmed the cause in a statement. This was a release packaging issue caused by human error, not a security breach. They noted that no customer data, no model weights, and no credentials were involved or exposed. That is technically accurate. It is also somewhat beside the point. Act 3. What was inside? The developer community moved fast. Within hours of Cheofan Show's post, thousands of engineers were dissecting the leaked code. What they found was not just a look at how Claude Code is built. It was, effectively, Anthropic's product roadmap, competitive strategy, and internal engineering. Culture laid bare simultaneously. Let's go through the most significant findings. The first thing that drew attention was Kairos, referenced more than 150 times throughout the source. Kairos is an unreleased autonomous daemon mode. The name comes from the ancient Greek concept of the right moment, the idea of acting at exactly the correct time. In Claude Code, Kairos allows the agent to operate as a persistent background process. It receives periodic tick, prompts to decide whether to act proactively. It maintains append-only daily log files. It can subscribe to GitHub webhooks, and it includes a process called AutoDream, a background memory consolidation system that runs as a forked subagent while the user is idle. During AutoDream, the agent merges disparate observations, resolves logical contradictions, and converts vague insights into concrete facts. Persistent memory, background autonomy, acting while you sleep. None of this was announced. All of it is compiled and sitting behind feature flags waiting to ship. The second major finding was the feature flag inventory. Developers cataloged 44 feature flags, gating capabilities that are fully built but not yet released to the public. 20 or more represent entirely unshipped features. This is not vaporware. This is working code, compiled and ready, simply switched off for the external build. Competitors now have a clear picture of what Anthropic is about to release next. The third finding that generated significant discussion was undercover mode, found in the system. Prompt embedded in the source, undercover mode is activated when Claude Code operates in public or open source repositories. The system prompt reads, verbatim, "You are operating undercover in a public/open source repository. Your commit messages, PR titles, and PR bodies must not contain any Anthropic internal information. Do not blow your cover." The feature is designed to allow Claude Code to contribute to open source projects without visibly identifying itself as an AI making the contributions. The ethics of that design decision are, to put it mildly, a matter of ongoing debate in the developer community. The fourth finding was the anti-distillation system. Anthropic had built controls into Claude, code that inject fake tool definitions into API requests when competitors appear to be scraping. The model's outputs, a technique called model distillation, where you train a cheaper model by having it learn from a more expensive one's outputs. The poisoned tool definitions are designed to corrupt any model trained this way. It is a creative, defensive measure. It is also now public knowledge, which limits its effectiveness considerably. The fifth finding was more prosaic but equally revealing. The source confirmed internal model. Codenames: Capybara for a Claude 4.6 variant, Fennec for Opus 4.6, and Numbat for an unreleased model still in testing. Internal comments noted that Capybara version 8 had a 29 to 30% false claims rate, a regression from the 16.7% rate seen in version 4. Engineers had added an assertiveness counterweight to prevent the model from becoming too aggressive in its code rewrites. These are internal benchmarks and struggles Anthropic had. Never disclosed publicly, every competitor now has them. And finally, in a detail that provided some levity to an otherwise grim situation, developers discovered that Claude Code uses a regex filter to detect user frustration by scanning for profanity and negative language. The filter includes words you would expect. The Hacker News community noted, with some delight, that a company positioning its AI as the most capable in the world was using a basic pattern match for sentiment analysis. One commenter compared it to a trucking company using horses to deliver its own spare parts. Act 4. The Claude Code phenomenon. If the leak itself was the story, what happened next was the story inside the story. Within hours of Chaofen-Shou's post, the code had been mirrored to GitHub. Developers began forking and studying it immediately. A repository called Claude Code appeared. Its creator, Sigrid Jin, described the moment in the repository's README. "I did what any engineer would do under pressure. I sat down, ported the core features to Python from scratch, and pushed it before the sun came up." Jin chose not to directly host Anthropic's leaked source code, aware of the legal exposure. Instead, she performed what developers call a clean room rewrite. She read the architecture, understood the design, and rebuilt it from scratch in Python without copying a single line of Anthropic's proprietary code. The resulting project is legally distinct from the original. The developer community responded with extraordinary speed. Claude Code crossed 50,000 GitHub stars in approximately 2 hours, according to the repository's own documentation and independent tracking. That makes it the fastest-growing repository in GitHub's history, surpassing the previous record holder by a significant margin. By April 1st, it had crossed 100,000 stars, more than Anthropic's own official Claude Code repository. A parallel Rust rewrite was already underway. For those unfamiliar with GitHub stars, they are not merely a vanity metric. They represent active developer interest, intent to contribute, and signals to enterprises about ecosystem. Momentum. 100,000 stars in under 48 hours is a genuinely extraordinary number. What Anthropic had tried to keep proprietary was, within a single day, the architectural foundation of a fast-moving open-source project that the company now has no ability to control. Act 5. Anthropic's response and the DMC a disaster. Anthropic's immediate response was appropriate. They pulled version 2.1.88 from NPM, rolled back to the previous version, and issued a clear statement acknowledging the error. No spin, no minimization, human error, packaging issue, no customer data affected, measures being implemented to prevent recurrence. Then things got complicated. Anthropic issued a DMCA takedown notice, a formal copyright enforcement request under U.S. law, targeting repositories hosting the leaked source code. In principle, this is legally defensible. The leaked code is Anthropic's intellectual property, and they have the right to request its removal. In practice, what happened next was a second incident layered on top of the first. Because GitHub's fork network is structured around an original repository, when Anthropic targeted one repository for takedown, the notice propagated through the fork network automatically. The result, approximately 8,100 repositories received takedown notices, including legitimate forks of Anthropic's own publicly released, non-leaked Claude Code repository. Developers who had done nothing wrong found their work blocked. Boris Cherny, Anthropic's head of Claude Code, publicly acknowledged the error. The company retracted the bulk of the takedown notices, limiting enforcement to one repository and 96 direct forks of the leaked source. GitHub restored access to the affected legitimate repositories, but by then, the damage to Anthropic's relationship with the developer community was compounded. In the space of 24 hours, the company had accidentally leaked its source code, and accidentally blocked thousands of legitimate developer projects, 2 unforced errors, one after the other. The legal question over Claude Code and other cleanroom rewrites remains unresolved. If Anthropic pursues copyright claims against a Python or Rust rewrite built from architectural knowledge, rather than copied code, they face a deeply uncomfortable legal irony. The same fair use and transformative work arguments they would make against developers are the arguments that AI companies, including Anthropic, rely on to defend training models on copyrighted data. As legal analyst Gergely Oros noted, pursuing those claims aggressively could undermine Anthropic's own defense in ongoing AI training data copyright litigation. Act 6. The context that makes this worse. This was not Anthropic's first mistake of the week, not even close. 5 days earlier, on March 26th, a content management system configuration error had exposed approximately 3,000 unpublished internal assets, including a draft blog post describing a powerful upcoming AI model known internally as Mythos or Capybara. That exposure gave reporters and researchers a preview of Anthropic's model roadmap before the company was ready to announce it. 2 significant operational security failures in 5 days, at a company that has built its entire brand identity around safety, rigor, and responsible AI development. The irony was not lost on anyone. Here is a company whose core marketing proposition is that it takes AI safety more seriously than its competitors, that it thinks longer, harder, and more carefully about the consequences of what it builds. And in the space of a week, it had twice failed to secure its own systems against basic human error. The Hacker News reaction was blunt, the developer community noted, with varying degrees of sympathy, that a company which had been marketing Claude Code as the world's most capable AI coding assistant had allowed its own code to leak due to a missing .npm ignore entry. Looks like someone vibed a little too hard and accidentally pushed the source to the public. NPM registry was among the gentler takes. Security researchers also immediately identified a secondary threat that Anthropic had not fully addressed in its public statements: typo squatting. Within hours of the leak, a user named Pacifier136 had published empty NPM packages under names resembling Anthropic's internal package names, staging dependency confusion attacks. If developers attempted to compile the leaked source and mistyped a package name, they could pull the attacker's package instead of a legitimate one. Those empty stubs, researchers noted, could be updated at any time with malicious payloads affecting everyone who had installed them. Act 7. The Industry Implications. Let's step back from Anthropic specifically and think about what this incident means for the AI industry broadly, because the implications extend well beyond one company's bad week. The first implication is competitive. Claude Code's architecture is now public knowledge. Anthropic's most direct competitors, OpenAI with Codex, Google with Gemini code tools, Cursor, and a dozen other players, now have a detailed engineering blueprint for how to build a production-grade AI coding agent, the multi-agent orchestration patterns, the memory, architecture, the permission model, the context management approach, all of it is documented. In 512,000 lines of readable TypeScript, the competitive moat that Anthropic had built through proprietary engineering is substantially narrower today than it was on March 30th. The second implication is about the open source movement. Claude Code has 100,000 stars and a community of contributors already working on Rust and Python rewrites. An open source ecosystem, built on Anthropic's architectural decisions, but outside Anthropic's control, is now forming rapidly. This is exactly the dynamic that historically drives enterprise adoption away from proprietary tools and toward community-maintained alternatives. The speed at which this happened, 100,000 stars in 48 hours, suggests the developer community was ready for this moment. The third implication is about IPO risk. Anthropic is widely expected to pursue an initial public offering. Public companies are held to substantially higher standards of operational security than private ones. Leaking your source code and then accidentally blocking 8,100 developer repositories in the same week is not the kind of operational record that makes institutional investors comfortable. The question is not whether this damages the IPO narrative. It does. The question is, how much? The fourth implication is about the nature of AI safety claims. Anthropic's brand is built on a specific promise that it is the safety-first AI lab, that it thinks more carefully than its competitors about the consequences of what it builds. This week demonstrated that safety culture and operational security culture are not the same thing, and that excellence in one does not guarantee competence in the other, That distinction matters for enterprises, evaluating which AI vendor to trust with sensitive workflows. The fifth implication is for every software team shipping proprietary code. The mechanism of this leak, a source map accidentally included in an NPM package, is not novel. Apple suffered the same failure. Identity provider Persona suffered the same failure. It is a well-documented failure class. Standard commercial security tooling catches it. The lesson is not that Anthropic is uniquely careless. The lesson is that build pipeline security is an easy thing to overlook and a very expensive thing to ignore. Act 8. What we do not yet know. Because this is a developing story, honesty requires us to be explicit about what remains uncertain. We do not know the full extent of competitive damage. The code has been mirrored on platforms that have promised never to take it down, and the architectural knowledge it contains is already being incorporated into competing projects. The competitive impact will take months to fully assess. We do not know the legal outcome of the Claude Code cleanroom rewrite. If Anthropic pursues that litigation aggressively, it creates legal and philosophical complications that extend far beyond this single incident. We do not know what the typo squatting packages contain, if anything. They were empty at time of discovery. Whether attackers update them with malicious payloads remains to be seen. We do not know whether any of the 44 unreleased features will be accelerated or delayed as a result of competitors now knowing about them. And we do not know whether this incident will produce any accountability inside Anthropic or whether the company's response will be limited to technical patches to the build pipeline. We will continue to follow this story. If significant developments emerge, we will produce a follow-up segment. Act 9. What this teaches us. The lessons here are different from the lessons in most episodes of this show. There is no nation-state to blame, no social engineer, no elaborate intrusion, just a missing line in, a configuration file, and a cloud storage bucket with the wrong access permissions. The first lesson, build pipeline security is a first-class security concern, not an afterthought. Source maps, debug symbols, internal configuration files, API keys baked into build artifacts. These are common failure modes with well-understood prevention mechanisms, automated checks for. These failure classes should be mandatory in any release pipeline. They are not glamorous. They are not expensive. They would have prevented this entirely. The second lesson, containment is usually impossible once code hits a public package registry. Anthropic pulled version 2.1.88 quickly. It did not matter. The code was already downloaded, archived, mirrored, forked, and rewritten before the company had even finished drafting its public statement. There is no unringing this bell. Build the controls before release, because after release, the only move left is damage management. The third lesson, brand is a liability when reality does not match it. Anthropic built a brand around safety and careful deliberation. That brand made this incident land harder than it would have for a competitor. The expectations you set are the standard you will be held to. The fourth lesson, the open source community moves faster than legal teams. Claude Code reached 50,000 stars before most of Anthropic's lawyers were awake. By the time DMCA notices were being drafted, the architectural knowledge was already being implemented in multiple languages by contributors around the world. If your competitive advantage depends entirely on proprietary code, and that code can be understood from a single leaked file, you do not have the advantage you think you have. And the fifth lesson, which applies to every enterprise using AI coding tools right now, the security implications of leaked source code are not limited to the vendor. Now that Claude Code's permission model, bash security validators, and tool invocation patterns are public, anyone researching how to manipulate or bypass those controls has a detailed map to work from. If you are using Claude Code in a production environment with access to sensitive systems, pay attention to the security advisories coming from Anthropic in the weeks ahead. The architectural exposure creates a new class of risk for users, not just for Anthropic itself. Outro. On March 31st, 2026, Anthropic accidentally published the blueprint of its most valuable product to the entire world via a 60-megabyte debugging file. Within 2 hours, the developer community had built the fastest-growing repository in GitHub. History on top of that blueprint. Within 24 hours, Anthropic had accidentally blocked 8,100 legitimate developer projects. While trying to contain the damage, the code is still out there, the mirrors are still up, the Rust rewrite is still being built. This story is not over. But the chapter that opened on the morning of March 31st closed very quickly. The moment Cheofan Shou followed a pointer in a source map file and found that Anthropic's cloud storage bucket was open to the public. A missing .npm ignore entry, a publicly accessible storage bucket, and one very awake intern at 4 a.m. That is all it took. I'm Cole Drayden. This is Dark Perimeter. We will keep watching, and we will see you inside the perimeter.